The Ambitious Africans podcast is building more than conversations. We're building a thinking community. If you're navigating a challenge, transition, or decision in your personal or professional journey, we invite you to share it with us using the link below. Selected reflections will be discussed in future episodes where other listeners will offer their perspective, insights, and lived experiences. This is not about having it all figured out. It's about learning out loud, hearing different viewpoints, and lightening the mental load by thinking together. Your submission can be anonymous, and the goal is perspective, not judgment. Go into the show notes below, fill out the form, and share your challenges, ideas, thoughts, and decision points with us, and we'll be more than happy to give you some directions. Dear ambitious African, this is your host, Secho. In this podcast, we'll discuss everything about our journeys and experiences towards achieving our goals for life and work as phenomenal change leaders in our varied communities. We'll feature other ambitious Africans crushing it through arts, social activism, tech innovations, entrepreneurship, and positive lifestyle and holistic well-being. We are the generation that is redefining Africa as we know it, and as an ambitious African, now is the time to get involved. Give us your feedback and ideas for our next podcast, and let's keep the conversations going. See you inside. Hi, welcome to the Ambitious Africans podcast. This is your host, Secho, and it's been an amazing and an interesting last couple of days. A lot has happened for me, especially there's been a bit of, things that's happened on different fronts. For me, I've been a bit busy, but I am so glad I'm getting back to my regular schedule for recording the episodes. Today I want to reflect on past patterns and connecting the dots backwards. There's this famous video of the late Steve Jobs, and I think he was speaking at either Harvard or Stanford, one of those graduation ceremonies, and he was talking about all the different things about his life. The fact that his birth mother didn't want to give him up to people who didn't have college degrees, and somehow he gets adopted by people who don't have college degrees, but they promise his mom that they're gonna take him to college, and they fulfill that promise. Even though they're struggling, they make ends meet to save up for him to go to college, and he decides to drop out of school. And because he had dropped out of school, he could attend these classes on the university campus, which gave him the flexibility to explore a lot of things, and essentially gain the skills that would later on be useful in his starting Apple. And the point of his entire story was to connect the dots backwards. And I'm reflecting on that today. I really want to just make space for all the things that have happened in your past life. if I can call it that way, in your past, that you're perhaps overlooking, but you should actually be paying attention to, because they're coming together to form a particular pattern, or they're coming together to form a particular trail or a pathway that you might be overlooking. And I think by recording this episode, I am putting myself in the space to respect, to regard, and acknowledge all the different things that have got me to this microphone and recording this episode. What do I mean? I mean, similar to Steve Jobs' story about all the different things that were happening around his life. They didn't make any sense. To be born to a mother who couldn't take care of you, being given to this kind of parent, like all the different things, they all seemed very mutually exclusive until you look back and realize, if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And because I was able to do this thing, I could go on to do. And I want to share a bit about my own background, and it's come across in different ways, but I just want to go through this exercise, and not to necessarily share my story per se, but to get you to also find some time this week to make space to sit down and trace and see where exactly the next few steps over the next 11 months for you as we enter into February 2026 could look like. So I'm going to do an example so that it becomes a bit practical, so it doesn't feel too philosophical. But one of the things I have learned over the last couple of weeks is that, and this was me reflecting on all the past things I had done in my career, and I'm like, I've always worked for companies or organizations that serve the African market, or they were designed to impact Africa. And I figured, maybe that's just a coincidence. Because when I started working a bit young as a teenager, but I would say my first proper kind of working started when I run community projects in my community. In you know the story, I grew up in a slum. I think I recorded an episode a couple of years ago about reading projects. Yeah. So that was for me where I started. It was just this burning desire that I want to just impact the lives of the young people in my community. And the main reason why I did that, and I'll share this quickly, and I hope the fact that it's coming to mind is because God wants somebody to hear it on this podcast. The reason I did run that community project was because I recognized that the other young people in my community were not as privileged as I am. And mind you, I'm not from a privileged background. But even at that young age, I recognized that there were some things that I had that they didn't have. How do I mean? I mean, when I finished senior high school and I failed my exam, one of my exams, and I came face to face with the possibility of not continuing my education, I realized how it was the presence of my family and my elder sister and her sacrifices that got me to rewrite my exams and even dream of going back to school. So just within that space, I was like, what if I didn't have this elder sister to support me, or this kind of family? Like, not many other young people have it. And so, inspired by that awareness of this privilege and this blessing that I had, I said I was going to start this reading project and help young people. In my head at the time, I figured, maybe if I expose them to the concept of books, they could learn personal development, and that could be their own way of, I guess, learning from somebody ahead of them, even if they don't have that physical person in their lives. So that was what inspired my community project. And for me, that was my initial introduction to working in any formal space. But when I started working there, I never really thought much about it beyond just that community, the slum I grew up in. But I would go on I would go on to meet somebody, a lady who at the time was just about leaving her banking job, was going to join her husband who had started this non-profit or social impact company. And the goal for this program, the goal for this company was to equip African young people, African youth with leadership skills. And then the next job I would go to, so I would work with them for a couple of years, and then I would just focus, on, and I would get admission into university. I'm now studying university. And even in university, as I'm volunteering for people, for things, they were all things that were targeting Africa. And these are Africans, okay? So I'm not talking about So let's say for example, volunteering for TEDx Accra, the conversations that people were having, people were building projects that were targeting Africa. And so it was just coincidence. So I think being in the narrative or being in the space of hearing a lot about creating for Africa, doing things for Africa was in the back burner for me. And then when I leave university, I get introduced to this international nonprofit. I do an internship there, and again, they work for Africa. I work for both the Ghana office and the Africa team from Ghana. And that's up until COVID hits. And again, it's still working for Africa. And then I would transition to working in that same nonprofit, but then the Ghana office specifically. And even then, I would work on projects that had African focus, because you'd have some funders who were targeting multiple countries in Africa to run projects, and Ghana happens to be one of them. So the conversations, the thread of all the things I've been doing have always been Africa. And sometimes Africa will be in the name of the organizations. And you think that's just all there is, right? Tell me why I say, okay, I'm transitioning. So maybe, let's say, for example, maybe it's because I'm in the impact space or in the nonprofit space. That's why I'm constantly working in places that are looking to support Africans. So when I transitioned to now working in marketing, tell me why the agency I decide to go work for is also targeting Africa, has multiple countries. In fact, the previous nonprofit I work at, right, they have multiple country offices in Africa. So now, as I transition, I end up in another industry, in this case, marketing, and yet the agency I work for also targets Africa with multiple country offices in African countries, and they are looking to expand to other African. I'm like, that's nice. That's interesting. And you think that would be all. The next time I go to work again for another organization, guess what? It's Africa. It's targeting Africa. And it's interesting. It's interesting how even beyond that, when I talk to people, I engage with people, there are instances where I volunteer for people, I engage with people from different industries, people who are starting businesses, anything. Most of the conversations are African. The conversations are African based. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was just connecting those dots. I'm like, it's interesting that I've always had this African thread following me. It wasn't by design. It wasn't something that I specifically decided that was going to be the trajectory of my career. And I'm still growing and evolving in my career. I don't know what the future holds, and I am at the mercy of God. But as far as I can connect the dots backwards, I can see how Africa is becoming a thread. Guys, it's even just dawning on me that this is called the Ambitious African Podcast. And that is even wild to think about. Like, it's even wild for me to think about. Like, and it's like everything is like, it's even, I'm even getting an epiphany as I'm recording this right here. Like, actually, there's this African thread along my work and my interest, and it wasn't something I planned, but I want you to think through also for yourself. It might not necessarily be your career, but maybe your interests. Have you always found yourself in certain spaces in certain kind of conversations so much that you've taken them for granted and you don't even see what they could be telling you about your calling, even, for example? Because in my case, what I'm learning over and over again is that the work I do is going to impact Africans. And I see how that is even playing out in my personal life, because when you see me with a group of Africans, right, you would think I could be from any of their countries. So like if you saw me with East Africans, West Africans, South Africans, I think the only part I could say not necessarily will be some parts of North Africans, but I do know there are Black people in North Africa. But like, and I'm not saying that, oh, I would blend in so well. No, this is like people externally telling me that I don't look like the country I tell them I'm from. So if there are instances where I'm interacting with Ghanaians and they don't even believe I'm Ghanaian, they're like, huh, I thought you're Nigerian. Nigerians will see me like, huh, I thought you're Nigerian. East African will see me like, huh, I thought you were Kenyan. In fact, there was one time people were trying to argue if I was from Southern Africa, if I was from West Africa. And I was like, guys, I'm West Africa. Like, I said I'm African through and through. At this point, there's like, and even the way my life has been, God has led me through my life. All the experiences I've had have always come from that African perspective. And I think that my level of identity is now becoming evolved and peeled as I step into my Africanness in the version that only God can design for me. And so I am connecting the dots in those ways. The interests I have, the kind of friends I have, the kind of cultural understandings I have, my ability to connect with almost every kind of African on this continent is wild. And even the way I see things, the way God has even designed my personality, I'm not one who loves excluding people. I don't like it when, for example, a group of Ghanaians meet and they're all speaking one of the local languages in Ghana, and all of a sudden they don't recognize that there is a non-Ghanaian amongst them, or there's even a Ghanaian amongst them who doesn't speak that local language. I don't like any form of exclusion, whether it's internally or outside of a particular group. I don't like it. And so just being in the space where I am becoming more of, I really want to make spaces for Africans to connect, to meet, to speak, to engage, to get to know each other is becoming more and more apparent for me. And so especially on this the Ambitious Africans podcast, it's now making sense how they're all coming together. When I say all the things that led me to this microphone, it's now making sense to me. And I haven't found all the things, but I am now becoming more aware of how God is leading me, and how God has been leading my experiences to this point. And now I have one label for it and one signal to tell me, oh, my work and my assignment, it's towards the African continent. I don't know what that will look like. Doesn't mean I'm looking to target the 1.5 billion people on the continent. It could just be 10 people from different countries on the continent, and that would be fine. But I believe that all the experiences I've had have sort of given me a stage of preparation to do this kind of work. And I want to throw it to you as well. I want you to take some time again, possibly this week, to try and connect the dots backwards. What have you what have you noticed about your trajectory so far? It could be in your career, it could be just even in your tastes, right? Your taste, the things you agree with, the things you don't agree with, your curiosities, like the questions you're asking, the kind of content you're consuming, the content, like the kind of things you're drawn to. Could they be hints of what God is calling you to do or calling you to be? And could they be hints to exactly what God has ordained for you to do at this particular point in time? And it's not just to find these things, it's also to pack them and take them to God and have Him tell you, I've been trying to show you this entire time. I've been giving you clues. I've been giving you ideas to put together to get to this awakening or to this understanding. And let that really lead you to accepting it, because it's one thing to know about these things and just brush it off. It's one of those things, but it's like, this is serious business. This is something that I have been designed for. Maybe I should give priority to it and make space for it, because if I don't, it would be such a good example of disobedience, and you genuinely do not want that. That is pretty much today's episode. I'm going to let you go so you can go think through what I have said and let me know what your own thread is. I'll see you in the next one.